Welcome back, Commander. This will be my final report in cataloging the events of the Second World War from the perspective of the Allied forces. Just like my last report, this one continues to follow the exploits of an unnamed field commander, who had previously handled missions in both Greece and Siberia. After successfully setting back the Soviets' atomic weapons program in Siberia, this field commander was promoted to Major, and transferred back to the Western Front. By this point, the war had begun to shift in the Allies' favor, who now began to go on the counteroffensive against the Soviet Union. Heavy fighting was occurring in Italy, where the Allies felt they could best utilize the unnamed commander's proven skills. Reporting back to General Carville, the field commander received initial details on the role he would play here in the Italian theater of operations.
Take a good long look, Major, because you'll be attacking that harbor at dawn. The Soviets are baby steps away from developing sea-to-ground missiles. Once those missile subs are underway, we risk losing naval superiority. I can't tell you how PO'd that'll make a lot of people around here. Your job, Major, is to take out those Soviet sub-pens, research centers, anything that'll keep those missiles from getting off the ground. Baby steps, Major. Think baby steps.
Though he was briefed by Carville, it was Deputy General Nikos Stavros who elected the field commander to lead the attack on this strategic harbor. Additional intelligence advised the commander to maneuver his forces quickly, for the minute the Soviets discovered the Allied presence in the area, all hell would break loose. Intelligence also warned the commander that a nearby civilian town in the region was sympathetic to the Soviet cause, and that he would have to keep a close watch on them. If any of the civilians attempted to inform the Soviets of the commander's presence, he had permission to terminate the informants. The commander's MCV arrived in the region from the west, and immediately deployed itself beside an ore field located just to the south. As the commander was coordinating the construction of his base, he noticed a civilian approaching from the southeast. Seeing the Allied base, this civilian immediately turned and ran eastward. Fearing that this civilian was a Soviet informant, the commander ordered 5 riflemen reinforcements to pursue the civilian. Unfortunately, the civilian spy was faster than the riflemen, who also had to stop and engage Soviet troops during their pursuit. Realizing that it was too late to stop the civilian spy, the Allied commander ordered his riflemen to return to base. This was a sound move, as Soviet paratroopers were dropped into the base. Though the paratroopers were eliminated, the commander knew that more attacks would soon be sent against his base, now that the Soviets were well aware of his presence. Following the construction of his war factory, the commander assembled a few Ranger light vehicles and had them scout out the region. Moving north, the Rangers took out 3 Soviet grenadiers guarding a ford in the river. Crossing the other side, the Rangers spotted the civilian spy running west through an ore field. The Rangers quickly drove over and killed the spy, preventing him, or her depending on other accounts, from reaching what was assumed to be another nearby base. The death of the spy would only delay the inevitable assaults that were now being launched against the Allied base. Initial attacks were conducted by enemy infantry, but soon Mi-24 Hinds were involved, and later heavy tanks supported by V-2 rocket launchers. The Soviets even made use of captured Allied APCs to try and rush their own engineers into the commander's base in an attempt to capture or severely damage his buildings. After countering these assaults, the commander sent out more units to scout out the region east of his base. These scouts discovered the civilian village, and the commander directed some of his units to form a perimeter around it. Any who would attempt to leave the village while the commander was conducting his operation would be killed, for he could take 0 chances that there weren't any more Soviet sympathizers among the populace. One of the commander's scout units discovered the first Soviet base, a small one just to the north of the village, and the first one that the civilian spy made contact with after finding the Allied base. Assembling an armored company, the commander ordered it to attack this first base, which was lightly defended. Charging through the southern entrance, the Allied armored company crushed many Soviet troops before focusing their fire on the barracks and radar dome. Both structures were brought down, along with a couple of flame towers. However, the commander underestimated the Soviets' formidable response to this attack. Heavy tanks, V-2 launchers, mammoth tanks, and even MiGs converged on the base to eliminate the Allied armored company. The Soviets succeeded, preventing the commander's forces from completely destroying this base, though they also took heavy casualties in the process. While the commander assembled a new armored company, he sent a spy across the river in the north, who managed to discover the second Soviet base. The spy was able to report the details of this base back to the commander before being killed by an attack dog. With his second armored company assembled, the commander ordered them to finish off what was left of the first Soviet base. The company succeeded, with no enemy reinforcements being sent to stop them. At the same time, the commander had built a naval yard and deployed 3 destroyers to bombard the second Soviet base from offshore. The destroyers managed to bring down 3 advanced power plants before the second armored company arrived to attack the base from the east. The Allied tanks were able to destroy those enemy units and structures that were out of range of the destroyers. The destroyers were then ordered to sail northward along the coast, encountering and sinking any Soviet submarines they came across. One destroyer was sunk by the subs, and another was lost when it was hit by the electric bolt of a Tesla coil. The loss of this destroyer did enable the commander to discover the third and final Soviet base, which was responsible for conducting the air raids against his own. This last base was heavily defended, and would require a substantial assault from land, sea, and air to be destroyed. The assault began with longbow attack helicopters eliminating the Tesla coil closest to the northern beach. This would enable the reinforced fleet of destroyers to sail in range of the enemy base and bombard it from offshore. Allied ground forces then attacked the base from the west, punching a hole through the concrete wall that protected it. Once through, the armored company focused on destroying the other Tesla coils nearby, taking heavy casualties in the process. During the battle, one of the Allied APCs dropped off 4 engineers, who rushed inside the enemy construction yard, capturing the building. This accomplishment was short-lived, as the yard was then destroyed by a Tesla coil. The remaining Allied forces focused on destroying the base's advanced power plants. Once enough of them were destroyed, the Tesla coils were brought offline, no longer having enough power to function. From here, the Allied forces could finish off the enemy base, unhindered by its remaining defenses. Once the last airfield had been destroyed, the rest of the base's infrastructure was dismantled. The few remaining Soviet units were then eliminated, completing the reclamation of this harbor for the Allies. No sooner had the field commander finished the reclamation of the harbor was he given a new, more critical mission. The Soviets had taken over a small research base, one that was conducting tests using the chronosphere. During the conflict, the chronosphere was badly damaged, and High Command feared it could explode. Normally, this would be a good thing, as it would prevent the Soviets from keeping the device for their own use. However, a group of scientists were captured during the takeover, and held inside the base. It was feared that these scientists would be killed when the chronosphere exploded, so it was up to the commander to lead a rescue team to fight their way into the base and retrieve the scientists. Intelligence advised the commander that there was only one way in and out of the base by way of a single bridge, so it was vital that this bridge be protected to ensure a successful evacuation. The field commander's mobile force of medium, light tanks, and rangers arrived along a road in the southeast corner of the region. They had roughly 1 hour and 30 minutes to rescue the scientists, which seemed like enough time, though they had no idea what kind of resistance they'd run into on their way to the base. After eliminating a squad of Soviet troops, the rescue team moved west, taking out 3 enemy tanks. A couple of these tanks were captured medium tanks that the Soviets here had procured from the Allied base. Crossing a small ford in a river, the team were attacked by a single V-2 rocket launcher atop a hill. The enemy vehicle was destroyed after the team made their way onto the hill. They noticed a Soviet plane fly overhead, paradropping enemy troops behind them across the river. The Allies waited for these troops to get in range and then gunned them down from their vantage point on the hill. The Allied team continued west, running into a Tesla coil on a cliff. The team focused fire on the coil to quickly bring it down, taking minimal casualties. Armored reinforcements arrived via a naval transport on a beach just to the west. The waters were guarded by Soviet submarines, which sank the transport after it offloaded all its passengers. Additional infantry reinforcements were dropped off from a transport helicopter, which came under attack by a Mammoth tank hiding in a small town just to the north. The Mammoth tank was destroyed, and the Allied team procured supplies and spare parts from the town church, which they used to repair their vehicles. Now heading northeast, the Allied rescue force saw 2 more Mammoth tanks approaching them. Using a remote-controlled demolition truck, the commander sent it forward to destroy the Mammoth tanks. One ended up surviving the massive explosion, but was finished off by the rest of the Allied forces. The commander's forces found the bridge mentioned in the briefing, along with another civilian town located beside it. He resolved to leave a few of his units behind to safeguard the bridge, knowing it was the only way across the river in and out of the region. As soon as his forces crossed the bridge, the commander received additional reinforcements in the form of 2 chronotanks. These chronotanks were armed with heat-seeking missiles that were essential to shooting down Soviet Hind attack helicopters. Additionally, Soviet troops that were hiding out in one of the buildings of the nearby village emerged, attempting to destroy the bridge. This ambush was stopped, though not without some Allied casualties being sustained. 2 Soviet supply trucks were spotted approaching the bridge from the southeast, and were promptly destroyed. A couple of crates of credits were acquired from the wreckage of these trucks. A few Allied prisoners were found in one of the village homes, freed after the ambush. Among these prisoners was a medic and a mechanic, who went to work patching up troops and repairing vehicles. A spy, along with a couple of engineers, would accompany the rescue team to the base. As the rescue team continued northeast, a couple of reinforcements were paradropped nearby, but came under attack by a Tesla coil. With the aid of ignited oil barrels nearby, the Tesla coil was destroyed, along with a couple of enemy medium tanks. A couple more enemy tanks from the north rushed past the rescue team, making for the bridge, but they were destroyed by those Allied units left behind to defend it. Continuing northward, a few more enemy tanks were destroyed, and 2 more chronotanks arrived to aid in the rescue effort. The route ahead was under guard by another Tesla coil on a ridge, so one of the chronotanks chrono-shifted on top of this ridge, igniting nearby oil barrels, which heavily damaged the coil, which the chronotank then finished off. Additional infantry reinforcements were brought in from a helicopter, though an attack dog killed most of the squad as they departed the chopper. The other 2 chronotanks joined the first on the ridge to aid in destroying a couple of helipads. The rest of the Allied team found a power plant beside a captured barracks to the north. The 2 engineers recaptured the barracks, and the commander used it to requisition a squad of riflemen to support his armor. Following the destruction of 2 captured bunkers, along with a few more enemy units, the rescue team finally arrived at the base. There were 2 entrances the team could utilize to enter the base, one in the north and one in the east. There are conflicting reports on which entrance the commander chose, but I believe it was the northern one, as it enabled him to quickly destroy the war factory, which was constantly assembling and deploying enemy tanks. Once the war factory was destroyed, the rescue team moved south to focus on destroying the 2 barracks and the kennel. With all unit production buildings destroyed, the spy infiltrated the Soviet command center, making contact with the scientists and freeing them. It is rumored that Albert Einstein himself was among this group. After making contact with the scientists, Allied reinforcements arrived from a naval transport which dropped off units on a beach just north of the base. However, following this vessel were 2 Soviet transports, which dropped off a company of Mammoth tanks. These tanks made their way into the base, with the goal of crushing the Allied rescue team once and for all. The Allied reinforcements stayed behind to hold off the mammoths, while the rest of their forces backtracked east and then south with the scientists. Using the bridge, the Allied forces crossed back to the other side of the river. They then destroyed the bridge, leaving the Mammoth Company stranded on the other side. Making their way south past the first village, the Allies spotted more Soviet naval transports dropping off a second company of Mammoth tanks along the western beach. The scientists were ordered to follow the road westward while the remaining Allied forces performed a rearguard action against the Mammoths. Seeing green smoke at the end of the road, the scientists made it to the exit, escaping the region unharmed from the Mammoths and the eventual explosion of the chronosphere.
Commander, I believe I've got something that belongs to you. Yours for the dramatic rescue of civilians at our captured research installation. I'd read the inscription, but if your head gets any bigger, I'll have to buy you a new helmet. Hell, you just won the Medal of Honor, son. Let me buy you a Shirley Temple at the Officers Club.
Now, despite General Carville claiming that the unnamed commander had been awarded the Medal of Honor, he was actually given the Silver Star. Perhaps the general had been drinking just a little too much before presenting the commander with such a prestigious reward, not realizing that he had picked up the wrong medal. In addition to the reward, the unnamed commander was given a temporary reprieve from his duties. Of course, the battle for Italy was still in full swing. With the help of Agent Tanya, the Allies were attempting to hinder new weapon development. However, the Soviets discovered this scheme, putting Tanya in jeopardy. Despite this exigent circumstance, the Soviet research centers had to be destroyed. Reinforcements would be sent into the region to support Tanya, but they would need a commander to lead them. With the unnamed commander currently unavailable, it was up to the legendary field commander A.9 to step in and see this mission through to completion. The Allies would provide the commander reinforcements when possible, though he could also expect some help from forces among the locals, as they harbored no sympathies for the Soviets. Commander A9 took charge of Tanya, along with a naval task force consisting of 4 gunboats and a transport that arrived in the region from the southwest. Tanya was loaded onto the transport and then dropped off on an island just to the north of her original position. A few Allied aligned resistance fighters emerged from a house beside the beach, offering their support to the commander. A transport helicopter was soon called in to evacuate the civilians on the island, but Soviet aircraft flew overhead, destroying the helicopter and bombarding the village. Soviet troops were then paradropped down to finish off what remained. These paratroopers were no match for Tanya, who eliminated them with the help of the resistance fighters. There wasn't much left after the strike on the village except a single crate of medical supplies and spare parts. The commander ordered one of the troops to stand guard over this crate in case he needed its contents for later in the mission. Tanya and the resistance fighters were then loaded onto the naval transport and escorted east. After disembarking on another island in the south, Tanya spotted friendly engineers and a couple of riflemen emerging from one of the houses among the village here. They emerged just as another Soviet airstrike was incoming. Thinking quickly, the commander ordered the arriving transport helicopter to break off its initial landing course, saving it from being destroyed by the enemy MiGs. This helicopter would now aid the commander for the remainder of the mission. The paratroopers the Soviets dropped in were easily taken out by Tanya. After the skirmish, one of the engineers discovered a crate of supplies that could be used to heal troops and repair vehicles. Just like with the first crate, the commander had this engineer watch over this second one in case it was needed later. As the commander was organizing his forces, he received word that a village on another island just north of his position was being attacked by the Soviets, and that resistance troops there would be overrun if they didn't receive help. Tanya was swiftly flown to the island, killing the Soviet troops threatening to overrun the local resistance soldiers. A couple of them were killed, but not before shooting down an Mi-24 Hind. Commander A9 ordered his forces to continue eastward, finding another island. As the gunboats focused on sinking an enemy submarine they encountered, a transport helicopter flew in and dropped off Allied rocket soldiers on the southern coast of the island. Before these reinforcements could be overwhelmed by the oncoming Soviet troops, the commander rushed his own forces onto the island to stop them. With Tanya and the other Allied troops countering the Soviet ground forces, the rocket infantry were able to focus on shooting down another Hind. After this fight, the commander noticed many of his troops had sustained injury, and so ordered the engineer to open the supply crate, using the medical supplies inside to heal his units. Tanya and some of the riflemen then made their way northward, finding the first technology center. Seeing friendly troops outside, Allied prisoners inside the center broke out. Tanya and the riflemen provided cover for these prisoners by eliminating the remaining Soviet troops here. Afterward, Tanya demolished the technology center using her explosives, along with any other surrounding buildings. Allied gunboats continued sailing northward, finding another island which was believed to be the location of the second technology center. Following the sinking of another enemy submarine, more reinforcements were flown onto the island, almost destroying another Hind. Tanya was again flown in to aid these troops in fighting the Soviet garrison. One of the recently rescued prisoners was a spy, who was used to scout out the Soviet base here. He quickly discovered the technology center, but trying to reach it from the base's main entrance would be difficult due to the flame towers that had been set up. The commander resolved to make his own entrance by blowing a hole in the concrete wall on the south side of the enemy base. After this hole was created, an attack dog was killed by Tanya, and the responding Hind was finished off by rocket infantry. Moving through the opening, Tanya demolished a couple of nearby buildings, prompting the base's remaining guards to try and stop her, but ultimately failing. After destroying the second technology center, Tanya set to work demolishing the rest of the base's primary buildings, leaving only a few defense structures standing, as they'd be no threat to the Allied forces now leaving the island. The gunboats made their way east through the waterways, discovering the final island in this region. More reinforcements were brought in, this time via a naval transport, which dropped off 3 tanks and a couple of soldiers onto this island. The reinforcements were immediately attacked by Soviet forces, but held their ground while the gunboats sank a couple of enemy submarines. Though a couple of gunboats were lost in this battle, the naval task force was reinforced with a couple new gunboats that arrived in the southwest, along with 2 destroyers. The reinforced task force sailed up the waterway northward, finding and sinking the last submarine in the region. Though another gunboat was lost, it was replaced by a new one that arrived from the southwest. Following the elimination of a couple of Soviet guard teams patrolling the edges of the enemy base, the spy was brought in to scout out the area. The main entrance to the base was heavily guarded by flame towers and Tesla coils. The spy discovered the base's construction yard over at the western edge of the region. Making his way into the center of the base, the spy found the last technology center before being killed by an attack dog. Commander A9 resolved to create a hole in the wall near the construction yard, which should enable Tanya to slip in and demolish this vital building. Utilizing the destroyer's long-range missiles, they were able to bring down a flame tower and one of the Tesla coils. With these threats out of the way, the gunboats could move in and destroy the concrete wall. The Soviet garrison responded to the attack, sending a couple of heavy tanks along with infantry against the Allies. These forces were eliminated, making room for Tanya to move in and destroy the construction yard. She then eliminated any other remaining soldiers nearby before using her explosives to demolish the war factory. Commander A9 then ordered Tanya to destroy the last technology center, completing their mission here. Returning from his temporary absence, the unnamed field commander received his next mission from Allied High Command. Intelligence uncovered that the Soviets were beginning construction of a new class of submarine capable of launching sea-to-ground missiles. Development of this weapon system could not be allowed to continue, especially given the devastation it could bring against Allied forces. The commander would guide a squad of troops to infiltrate the Soviet base's power grid. Bringing it down would allow additional reinforcements to be sent in, which the commander would then use to break into the Soviet base and destroy the sub-pin. Should any of these new missile submarines be built before the pin could be destroyed, the commander would have to do whatever he could to prevent them from escaping the region. The Allied infiltration team was paradropped on the west side of the large island that the Soviet facility was located on. This team consisted of riflemen, rocket soldiers, and a medic. As the soldiers were getting themselves organized after the drop, they were discovered by Soviet troops, who had seen the Allied paratroopers jumping out their planes as they flew over the island. All the Soviet troops were eliminated, and once the injured had been patched up by the medic, they were ordered to begin their search for the power grid by heading east. Time was of the essence, as according to Allied intelligence, they only had about 20 minutes before the first missile sub was to be built and sent out to sea. Fortunately for the Allied troops, they quickly discovered the Soviet power grid, composed of 2 advanced power plants. Only 5 enemy soldiers were guarding the power plants, and the Allied troops easily disposed of them before destroying the buildings. With these power plants destroyed, the Tesla coils that were guarding the beach on the south side of the island could no longer function, allowing an Allied naval transport to land reinforcements onto the island. These reinforcements were 2 demolition trucks and 3 engineers. This second team quickly joined up with the initial infiltration units. Just to the north of the Allied forces was a dirt road flanked by 2 flame towers on each side, with each of these towers wedged between escarpments leading up to high ground. These flame towers were still functional, being attached to the power grid of the Soviets' base, rather than the now destroyed south grid. Using the 2 demolition trucks at his disposal, the commander ordered them forward, detonating beside the flame towers. Their atomic blasts easily destroyed these structures, clearing the way for the infantry. With the towers gone, the Allied infantry moved forward, finding that the bridge across the river separating the southern and northern halves of the island had already been destroyed prior by the Soviets. To the team's east was an enemy radar dome, that if captured, would enable the commander to bring in additional reinforcements, as well as reveal the exact location of the enemy's submarine pin. After taking out the Soviet guards, the engineers made their way into the dome, relaying the proper coordinates for the reinforcements, 3 chronotanks, to chronoshift in across the river on the northern half of the island. Noticing that their southern radar dome had been captured, the Soviets brought in reinforcements via naval transports to land on the beach east of the building. As the Soviet infantry were destroying the captured radar dome, the Allied troops fled westward, taking up defensive positions in a small village. Being trapped in the village, the Allied infantry killed as many enemy soldiers as they could. They were ultimately overwhelmed, with not one Allied soldier surviving. From here, it was up to the commander's chronotanks to finish the mission. The commander didn't have the luxury to take his time and fight through the Soviet defenders at the base, though such a task would not be necessary, as he noticed a small isle located beside the submarine pin. The commander ordered his chronotanks to chronoshift onto this island, where they could attack the sub-pin with impunity. Their missiles quickly brought the structure down before any of the new enemy submarines could be built, resulting in another successful mission for the unnamed commander.
We got a hostage situation, all right. We've got a hostage situation that involves every major Allied research scientist. But suppose we free these hostages. Then it's even worse. We've got hot spots everywhere, Colonel. This is Poland. I've got super tanks on my tail, M.A.D. tanks. I've got nukes pointed at London. And in the middle of all this, I've got a Soviet research scientist that I've got to evac. And then there's the little matter of running the Soviet army out of Poland. I hope you took care of business before you got in the car, Colonel. Because, son, you're in for one hell of a ride.
The next time we'd get to see the unnamed commander in action was during the latter half of the war, during which the Allies were pushing back the Soviet Union on all fronts. Some of the heaviest fighting took place in Poland, where the Union maintained a formidable foothold, one that the Allies were determined to break. Now having been promoted to the rank of colonel, the unnamed commander was brought in to aid Carville in handling the most pressing of missions in Soviet-controlled Poland. It's important to note that we have conflicting reports as to the exact order that the commander handled these missions. I've split these two reports into the Aftermath version and the Retaliation version. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll be following the events as outlined in the Aftermath version, which starts with the first mission Carville alluded to at the beginning of his briefing with the commander, negotiations. The Soviet force was holed up in a small town, threatening to kill a hostage every 5 minutes until their demands were met. The Allies maintained a policy of not negotiating with terrorists, and sought a way to free the hostages without giving in to the Soviet contingent's demands. Phase 1 of the mission would be to locate the hostages, freeing as many of them as possible, and getting them safely to a nearby abandoned church. Once achieved, Phase 2 of the mission could commence, with the commander signaling for reinforcements to move in and finish off the Soviet forces. Agent Tanya was brought in to aid the commander in completing Phase 1 of the mission, being prayer dropped on the outskirts of the town in the southwest. She first made her way northward, taking out 3 enemy soldiers before encountering a barrier of flame towers and barbed wire. With this path blocked, Tanya headed east, skirting the coast of a lake. She encountered a couple of Soviet soldiers and attack dogs, standing guard beside oil pumps and barrels. Shooting the barrels caused a chain reaction of explosions that killed all the enemy units. To her north, Tanya found what was once another path toward the village, that was now blocked by large rocks and the wreck of a crashed Yak airplane. Continuing east, Tanya killed 3 more enemy soldiers, though once again found herself blocked by a flame tower. Tanya again tried heading north to find an open path, passing by 2 SAM sites. Killing another enemy soldier, Tanya again found herself blocked, this time by a barbed wire fence. However, there were plenty of enemy units on guard on the opposite side that she wouldn't be able to fight through even if she could surpass the fence. Requesting assistance, Tanya was informed that air support would be provided if she destroyed the nearby SAM sites. After achieving this, 3 longbow attack helicopters flew in and destroyed the flame tower, clearing the way for Tanya. Now heading in a northeastern direction, Tanya saw 2 Soviet soldiers shooting at a lone house. After killing both of them, a civilian ran outside the dwelling. Thankful that Tanya had rescued him, the civilian would guide Tanya to where the hostages were being held. Crossing a ford in a river, Tanya and the civilian headed north through a forest. Up ahead, they saw a Soviet patrol approaching them, and took cover behind some trees at the eastern edge of the forest. As they waited for the patrol to pass, Tanya heard a gunshot fire off in the distance. 5 minutes had just gone by, and the first hostage had been executed. In another 5 minutes, the second hostage would meet the same grim fate. Once the patrol had passed them by, Tanya and the civilian continued north. The 2 then headed west, finding a damaged bridge. Crossing the bridge, they moved further west, sighting the hostages surrounded by a barbed wire fence and a Soviet general standing just outside. Tanya made straight for the general, who upon seeing her, called for help while he made his escape. Tanya immediately had to deal with a few soldiers emerging from a nearby house. At the same time, the civilian, eager to rescue his fellow villagers, used his own handgun to ignite some nearby oil barrels, causing an explosion that destroyed a nearby structure, creating a gap in the fence that allowed the hostages to escape. While brave, this action cost the civilian his life, as he was too close to the exploding barrels. Eliminating another Soviet patrol coming from the south by igniting more oil barrels, Tanya then met up with the hostages. The initial plan was to escape back across the bridge, but Soviet reinforcements arrived via transport helicopter, causing Tanya to take an alternative route to the north. Frustrated that she hadn't gotten the enemy general, Tanya couldn't help but wonder how far he had escaped, and so took a short detour west. Looking down from atop a hill, she saw the general waiting outside a house. Seeing some conveniently placed oil barrels nearby, Tanya destroyed them, causing a chain reaction that killed the Soviet general. This would turn out to be a valuable action, for if the general had been left alive, he would have called in reinforcements to establish a base nearby, making it more difficult for the Allied commander to eliminate the Soviet presence in this region. With the general dead, Tanya backtracked east along a hill with the hostages, before turning south to make their way through the eastern forest. As they did so, they spotted a heavy tank, supported by a couple of shock troopers, headed their way. Just like before, Tanya and the hostages hid among some trees at the eastern edge of the forest. They also found a crate of medical supplies here, which Tanya used to patch up any wounds she or the hostages had sustained. After the patrol had gone by, Tanya led the hostages south across the river. They finally arrived at the church where Tanya ordered the hostages to hide out. With the hostages safe, Tanya moved west back to her initial drop-off point. When she returned, Tanya began Phase 2 of the mission, signaling for reinforcements by deploying green smoke. Allied paratroopers arrived, along with 3 medium tanks and a demo truck entering the region along a road from the west. A short time later, 2 more medium tanks, a mechanic, and a couple of mobile artillery vehicles showed up. The Allied artillery vehicles were ordered to bombard the flame towers in the north, destroying both. The demo truck was then sent forward, encountering a couple of heavy tanks supported by infantry. The truck's explosion killed all the infantry and damaged the heavy tanks, which were finished off by the medium tanks. As the Allied force pressed forward, 2 chronotanks chronoshifted in to aid them. Together, they eliminated several enemy troops, along with another heavy tank. The Allies then made their way east into the village to take out the remaining Soviet structures there, which included an advanced power plant, command center, and flame tower. A large battle ensued, which saw more oil barrels being ignited, troops being killed, and the enemy command center being destroyed. The rest of the Soviet infrastructure was dismantled, and their remaining units made a desperate last-ditch attempt to wipe out the Allied forces. They failed, and with all Soviet forces eliminated and the hostages safe, the commander's mission was complete. After resolving the hostage situation, the unnamed commander was next tasked with aiding in the defection of a Soviet scientist named Dr. Dmitri, who was the creator of a new Soviet super tank. The Allies' original plan was to extract Dmitri while the Soviets were testing their new weapon, but something had gone wrong. The super tanks had gone out of control, and Dmitri went missing, most likely hiding out in a nearby village. With his reinforcements, the commander was tasked with reaching the Allies' damaged outpost in the region and repairing it. Once done, the commander was to find and evacuate Dmitri. As for dealing with the Soviet super tanks, which were apparently autonomous, they could be reprogrammed by sending a spy inside a Soviet radar dome, using the systems there to turn the machines against their creators. The commander's forces arrived via a long bridge located in the southwest of the region. His task force consisted of a single tank platoon composed of 2 light tanks and 2 medium tanks. The tanks were supported by a squad of infantrymen, along with 2 engineers and a thief. Crossing the bridge, the task force heard the sounds of battle off in the distance to the east, where the out-of-control super tanks were rampaging through a civilian village. Moving north, the Allied task force encountered Soviet troops, taking them all out. Behind these troops was an oil field, guarded by 2 flame towers, along with a power plant, ore silo, and submarine pen. Keeping their distance, the medium tanks were able to destroy the flame towers without taking any damage from them. This gave the thief an opening to reach the silo, breaking inside it and stealing 1,000 credits worth of ore for the commander. Subsequently, the tanks then damaged the submarine pen enough to allow the 2 engineers to capture it. The commander used the stolen credits to build a naval transport. With it, he ferried his units across the river to the land on the other side, which was where the Allied outpost was supposed to be located. The tanks were the first to be ferried across the river, and after disembarking, they came under attack by a V-2 rocket launcher guarding the riverbank. The commander ordered his tanks to immediately destroy this launcher before bringing the infantry squad over. Moving north, the task force found the friendly outpost, which was indeed heavily damaged. The commander tasked the ore truck to harvest the resources located on a hill directly south of the outpost. Once enough credits had been generated by the gathered resources, he then used the money to repair all the buildings. After doing so, the base came under attack by Soviet forces, which the commander managed to defeat. It seems the Soviets were well aware of the base's presence, though were primarily concerned with the super tanks. Thus far, the Soviets had failed to stop them, even after using a demolition truck against the super tanks, which seemed to only barely scratch their armor. The commander was informed by personnel at the outpost that Dr. Dmitri was believed to be hiding out in a village far to the south, which would require his forces to pass by the large Soviet research base nearby. One report says that the commander was able to send a rescue team down there and evacuate Dmitri before dealing with the super tanks, while another report claims the opposite happened. For this entry, I'll focus on the latter report, which describes how the commander recruited a spy and sent him eastward, along with his original tank platoon, to find the enemy radar dome. After crossing a bridge to the east, while running over a couple of attack dogs, the tank platoon engaged Soviet infantry and a heavy tank. With these obstacles out the way, the platoon found a smaller Soviet base just to their south, seeing what they believed was the enemy radar dome. At the same time, the super tanks were now bringing their destructive onslaught upon more civilian infrastructure just south of the Allied outpost. If the super tanks weren't stopped soon, they would most likely move on to destroy the Allied outpost. Wasting no time, the APC carrying the spy rushed over to the enemy radar dome located beside a technology center. Departing the vehicle, the spy successfully infiltrated the building and managed to reprogram the super tank's targeting parameters, causing them to head south toward the larger Soviet base. The APC destroyed one of the 3 supply trucks parked outside the radar dome, yielding a crate of credits. The other 2 supply trucks fled southward, leaving the APC to acquire the crate. The supply trucks took shelter in the larger Soviet base just as the super tanks were approaching it from the north. They came under heavy attack by the base's Tesla and Flame Tower defenses. The tanks shrugged off these attacks, however, making their way inside. One of the super tanks entered from an entrance to the east of the base, self-destructing beside a couple of advanced power plants. The shockwave of its destruction caused a couple of demolition trucks nearby to explode, leveling the entire eastern half of the base. The other 2 super tanks entered the base from the western entrance, firing upon any enemy units that stood in their way. The tanks moved to the southwest corner of the base before also self-destructing. The first one destroying any remaining buildings, and the second one finishing off any remaining units. With the primary Soviet base destroyed, the commander ordered his tank platoon to head south to find Dr. Dmitri. The platoon reached the civilian village in the far south, encountering no resistance along the way. Seeing the Allied tanks, Dr. Dmitri emerged from the village's chapel. A transport helicopter arrived on the scene a short time later, allowing Dmitri to board the chopper to complete his exfiltration from the region. With Dmitri now safely in the hands of the Allies and the super tank threat eliminated, the commander's mission here was complete. The commander was next required to stop the Soviets from initiating an A-bomb strike on London, which was where the Allies' headquarters for unified operations was located. It's unclear whether this mission was taking place after the Soviets' initial attempt to nuke London, which was thwarted by Commander A9, or before. Either way, this plan could never be allowed to become a reality. The missile silos were located on a large island that only had a single beach access point that was heavily guarded. Airlifting in units also wasn't an option, as the Soviets had deployed plenty of SAM sites on nearby islands. The Allies' only other option was to use the chronotank. The commander would have to chronoshift his assigned chronotanks from one island to another, destroying the radar domes controlling the SAM sites. Once dealt with, Tanya would arrive by plane to soften up the large island's defenses. With power to these defenses cut off, the Allies could sail in an MCV via naval transport, making landfall on the beach. From here, the commander could build up his base and assemble the forces needed to destroy the missile silos. The commander's chronotanks arrived on the first island just in time to stop a couple of Soviet vehicles from destroying a chapel in the middle of a village. The enemy heavy tank escaped the island by way of a naval transport. The civilians let the two chronotanks' crews know of a supply truck that drove north across a nearby bridge. The chronotanks heeded the civilians' words and went north, encountering Soviet troops attempting to destroy the bridge. These troops were taken out using nearby oil barrels to set off a chain reaction of explosions. Crossing the bridge, the chronotanks found the supply truck and destroyed it, picking up a crate of credits from its wreckage. These would come in handy later in the mission, when the commander would need to construct his base. No SAM sites were found on this first island, so the chronotanks were ordered to chronoshift to the island just west of the first one. One nearby SAM site was destroyed before the tanks made their way northward through a pass. Along the way, the tanks destroyed a couple of flame towers and another SAM site. They soon found the first radar dome, destroying 2 more flame towers that were protecting it. Before the tanks took down the dome, however, they headed west, finding a technology center. The commander ordered them to destroy the building, which ended up freeing an Allied engineer that had been imprisoned inside. The chronotanks then backtracked to the radar dome. Destroying the building caused any other remaining SAM sites on the island to be disabled. Among the rubble of the building was a crate full of parts and supplies the chronotank crews used to repair any damage their vehicles had thus far sustained. The chronotanks then chronoshifted to the third island, west of the second. The tanks destroyed another SAM site before moving south, rounding the edge of a slope. One of the tanks focused on destroying another SAM site, while the other took out an enemy patrol guarding the opposite side of a bridge. Crossing the bridge, the tanks moved north, encountering a couple of flame towers situated behind some sandbags. As the chronotanks focused on destroying these towers, a Soviet officer was seen running out of the radar dome a short distance away. This officer made his way over to a transport helicopter, which flew him over to one of the Soviet bases on the mainland. Once they were past the flame towers, the chronotanks focused on destroying the last radar dome, which, like the previous one, resulted in the destruction of any remaining SAM sites on the third island. Another crate of supplies was found within the rubble of this second dome, and was acquired by the chronotanks. With all the SAM sites now gone, the Allies sent a couple of longbow attack helicopters in to destroy a Tesla coil that was too close to the drop zone that Tanya was paradropped onto. Tanya made her way north, eliminating any enemy infantry she encountered. Shooting some nearby oil barrels resulted in the destruction of 2 flame towers guarding a small ford in a river. This opening enabled Tanya to cross the river and demolish 2 advanced power plants using her explosives. With these power plants gone, the second Tesla coil guarding the entrance toward the beach was now disabled, allowing a naval transport to move in and drop off the commander's MCV onto the main island. The commander deployed his MCV near an ore and gem field, immediately getting to work on base construction. It wasn't long until a Soviet patrol discovered the base, though the troops were all killed by Tanya before they could do any substantial damage. However, this would not be the only attack the Soviets would commit against the Allied commander, sending as many as they needed to dislodge his foothold on their island. As part of his usual strategy, the commander assembled an armored company and sent them east to find the first missile silo. The company engaged Soviet forces in an ore field, even coming under attack by a couple of Mi-24 Hinds. This air attack forced the company to fall back a bit to allow the chronotanks to join up with them to shoot down the Hinds. The armored company then found the entrance to one of the Soviet missile bases. The entrance was well defended, and so the Allied commander searched around for potential flanking routes. Raised land stretched east along the north end of the base. While there was no entrance to exploit here, the height vantage enabled the commander to see a space at the back of the base which the chronotanks could chronoshift to. Doing so enabled them to destroy the base's power plants. To avoid being taken out by the responding enemy infantry, the chronotanks chronoshifted up onto the high ground in the north. Despite the destruction of these power plants, the base still had plenty of power from the Soviet secondary base, enabling them to keep their Tesla coils online. This meant the armored company had to take casualties when breaching the main entrance. After doing so, the Allied armored units rushed over to the missile silo, focusing their fire on it until it was destroyed. The surviving Allied vehicles then returned to base for repairs and reinforcement. To reduce the number of assaults against his base, the Allied commander ordered his armored company to hunt harvesters in the eastern ore field, cutting off the resources the Soviets needed to fund their attacks against him. At the same time, a couple of light tanks were sent southeast to find the second Soviet base. They succeeded, discovering one entrance on the west side of the base and another in the north. The commander decided that breaching the northern entrance would be the best tactic, as there was only one Tesla coil to get through. This coil was destroyed by a couple of longbow attack helicopters prior to the main assault. The assault was conducted by the commander's armored company of medium tanks and APCs, which easily eliminated the V-2 launchers near the entrance. The chrono tanks, situated on high ground to the east overlooking the base, bombarded nearby advanced power plants. The Allied armored company carved a path of destruction through the back of the base, finding the construction yard and destroying it. With the Soviets no longer able to reconstruct any lost buildings, the Allied forces now focused their fire on the last missile silo, ending this atomic threat for good. At this point, the commander's mission was complete, leaving his forces to finish off what remained of the Soviet presence in this region. Upon returning from his last mission, the unnamed commander received Covert Order 24-H. This brief document provided details regarding the development of a new Soviet tank that could send shockwaves throughout the area, damaging everything around it. Needless to say, further development of such a weapon, called the Mutually Assured Destruction, or M.A.D. tank, had to be halted. The commander was to get a spy into all three of the Soviet intel centers in the region, which would reveal the location of the M.A.D. tank's remote control station. Once found, the commander was to destroy it, halting the production of any M.A.D. tanks, which would allow him to destroy the rest of the facility. Intel also noted that an Iron Curtain was present at the facility, protecting the Soviets' other tanks during tests. Thus, it would be prudent for the commander to prioritize destroying the structure should the opportunity present itself. The Allied commander arrived on scene to find a base already established in the northwest corner of the region. Some of the buildings had been noticeably damaged, though there were no signs of a battle having taken place. While conducting repairs, the commander was informed by the base personnel that the damage had been caused by the M.A.D. tank test the Soviets had been conducting atop a hill just to the southeast. No sooner had the commander learned this information did he receive word that another test was about to be conducted. Reaching the top of the hill, which was protected by 6 mammoth tanks, a M.A.D. tank initiated its deployment. This process destroyed the M.A.D. tank itself, but the end result sent a massive shockwave across the entire region, damaging any vehicles or structures, regardless of whose side they were on. Infantry were the only units left unharmed by the attack. Needing to discover the location of the control station as quickly as possible, the commander sent his first spy to the south in search of the first intel center. The spy found it, and successfully made his way inside. However, the Soviets discovered the infiltration, resulting in the release of attack dogs to go out and hunt down any other spies. To protect against the attack dogs prowling the area, the commander put his other spies inside an APC. As the APC went out searching for the other 2 intel centers, the vehicle ran into a Soviet dog patrol and used its machine gun to eliminate it. The APC found a pass between 2 hills, using it to move southeast. The APC soon found itself in the middle of the enemy facility, finding the second intel center. One of the spies hopped out of the APC and infiltrated this building, resulting in the release of more attack dogs. While this was going on, Soviet paratroopers were dropped into the Allied commander's own base. Their goal was to destroy the chronosphere, which the commander protected using bunkers and a couple of chronotanks. Such air raids were a constant threat that the commander had to deal with throughout the mission. As for the APC, it took a lot of damage from enemy defenders while moving north through the base in search of the final intel center. The building was found, but the APC was destroyed immediately afterward by a V-2 launcher. Thankfully, the spy survived and made his way inside the intel center. Using the information gathered from all three centers, the commander was able to discover the location of the control station. It was on an island all the way in the southeast corner of the region. The control station was well defended by SAM sites, so an air attack against it wouldn't be ideal. The commander decided on using the chronotanks, though he chose to have them focus on destroying the nearby construction yard first, as it could potentially rebuild the control station. While the chronotanks succeeded in destroying the yard, the Soviet infantry eliminated all the chronotanks before they could take down the control station. While this attack wasn't totally successful, the commander had an alternate plan. This involved the construction of a naval yard and the deployment of a cruiser. Using the chronosphere, the commander chronoshifted the cruiser into the river between the Soviet-controlled island and mainland. The cruiser was ordered to target the control station, destroying it with a single salvo. On the coast of the mainland was the Iron Curtain, which the cruiser brought its guns to bear against until the structure came crumbling down. With the primary buildings now destroyed, and the Soviets having no way of reconstructing them, the commander could take his time in cleaning up the remaining enemy forces. While building tanks to make a formidable assault against the main facility in the south, the commander used his cruiser, which had chronoshifted back to its original position, to bombard any units and structures at the main entrance of the facility. With the entrance cracked wide open, the commander's armored company drove into the base unopposed, destroying whatever survived the cruiser's offshore bombardment. The company swiftly moved south, eliminating a couple of helipads, while also putting an end to the base's ore harvesting and refinery facilities. The assault continued eastward, taking out a barracks, a couple of advanced power plants, and kennels. At the same time, the cruiser was once again chronoshifted to the river in the southeast, bombarding more structures and enemy units along the coast of the mainland. The armored company managed to battle its way to the east side of the base, where they then pushed north to demolish the Soviets' remaining structures, along with any units that stood in their way. After accomplishing this task, the armored company returned to base for repairs and replenishment. The cruiser finished off whatever enemy infantry remained on the control station's island, leaving the 6 mammoth tanks atop the hill in the middle of the region as the remaining Soviet units. When ready, the commander launched an attack against these tanks, utilizing his armored units, who were supported by a couple of longbow attack helicopters. After a fierce final battle, the last of the mammoth tanks was destroyed, bringing an end to the mission. With the M.A.D. threat taken care of, the commander was given his final mission here in Poland. Acting on misinformation the Allies provided, the Soviets sent a division into Allied territory to deal with what they thought was a heavy weapons facility. In truth, the facility was a fake one, but the Allies wanted the Soviets to believe it was real. The commander's job was to defend the fake base for about 25 minutes until reinforcements could arrive to assist him. Once they did, the commander was advised to destroy the enemy radar dome, preventing them from calling in their own reinforcements. At that point, all the commander had to do was finish off the now isolated Soviet division. Doing so would be a major blow to the Soviet presence here in Poland, so much so that it might even drive their remaining forces out of the country entirely. The commander took control of the fake base just as the Soviets were launching their first assault against it. This attack came from all directions, with the Soviets succeeding in destroying one of the 3 fake war factory buildings. The Soviets made these fake structures their primary targets, which was good, since the commander was limited on the number of units he had at his disposal in this first phase of the mission. The commander's construction yard and radar dome were also fake, so he had no radar or capabilities to reconstruct lost buildings. The commander did wish to scout out the region as much as he could, and sent out a couple of rangers to perform this task. One of them was able to pick up a crate of credits it obtained from an oil pump located atop a nearby hill just to the north of the base. Soon afterward, a V-2 launcher attacked the Allied base from that same hill. Though the vehicle was destroyed, it showed the commander that the Soviets would use such nearby elevated positions to their advantage. To prevent this, the commander ordered his mine layer to place mines atop the hill surrounding his base, along with other potential choke points. One of the rangers acquired a second crate of credits by destroying a couple of oil pumps just to the east of the base. Moving further east, that same ranger crossed a bridge and found a couple more oil pumps and some barrels. Shooting the barrels in an attempt to destroy the pumps, the explosions caused the bridge to collapse. The loud explosion resulted in the civilians in the nearby village, who were sympathetic to the Soviet cause, to attack the ranger. Defending itself, the ranger noticed an orange supply truck heading west, but was unable to pursue due to being destroyed by a couple of Soviet heavy tanks. These tanks are part of the second major assault sent against the commander's base, which he was able to successfully repel, taking little infrastructural damage or casualties. After the attack, another bridge was discovered west of the base, and the commander ordered a couple of his light tanks to destroy it, in an attempt to prevent enemy forces from using it to flank his base. Between assaults, the Soviets conducted bombing runs against the Allied base, along with trying to deploy paratroopers into the middle of it. Indeed, during the third assault, a MiG flew over the base and destroyed another one of the fake war factories. The defenders fought against a mammoth tank supported by grenadiers on the east side of the base, while Soviet shock troopers were killed assaulting from the west. More Soviet troops came in from the east and were eliminated, though took some of the Allied defenses with them. With only 4 minutes left until reinforcements arrived, the commander and his forces had to remain steadfast in holding back the next assault. The mines placed on the hills proved useful in destroying a couple of V-2 rocket launchers. 2 more V-2 launchers were eliminated by the light tanks on the east side, after the third fake war factory was destroyed during a Yak strafing run. Allied reinforcements finally arrived from the east, composed of 2 light tanks, 2 demolition trucks, 2 medium tanks, 2 artillery tanks, and most importantly, an MCV. Additionally, 2 destroyers arrived in the waterway northeast of the base. The commander disassembled the fake construction yard in order to make room for the real one to be deployed. While he was constructing real buildings for his base, the commander sent a few light tanks to scout out the northwest part of the region. The tanks discovered a chapel on top of a hill, with the orange supply truck from earlier parked beside it. The tanks destroyed both the truck and the chapel, finding a single crate full of credits in each of them. As this was going on, an Allied naval transport sailed in from the west and dropped off 4 tanks and a mechanic on the beach to the northwest. The beach was guarded by a few Soviet troops and a heavy tank, all of which were taken out by the Allied tank platoon. This platoon was then ordered to move north and enter the Soviet base from the west. Doing so, they found 3 airfields and a radar dome. One of the airfields was easily destroyed by igniting nearby oil barrels. Instead of destroying the other 2 airfields, the commander ordered the tanks to focus fire on the radar dome. Destroying this building meant the Soviet base would be unable to call in reinforcements. The tank platoon succeeded, but were wiped out by the Soviet defenders. Meanwhile, back at the Allied base, the commander had finished construction of a refinery to process nearby gathered ore. This resulted in him receiving more reinforcements from the west, these being 2 Rangers and 2 medium tanks. One of the Rangers was sent directly north, discovering the main entrance to the Soviet base. As expected, the entrance was well guarded, even more so as it required any attackers to fight uphill. The commander attempted to find an alternate entrance in the east from the waterway, but none were found that weren't just as well guarded. The commander realized he would have no choice but to make a direct attack against the base via its main entrance. Gathering enough forces to launch an attack proved challenging, as despite being cut off from reinforcements, units from the Soviet base still launched their own attacks against the Allied commander. Eventually, the commander assembled a large armored company of medium tanks. He wanted to destroy the entire Soviet base with one strong attack, In addition, he hoped the medium tanks would distract the Soviet defenders long enough for him to utilize his 2 demolition trucks. When the time was right, the assault commenced. The tanks came under heavy attack by Soviet aircraft as they approached the hill leading up to the base's entrance. The commander ordered his tanks to focus on destroying the Tesla coils since they were the primary threat. Once the Tesla coils were down, the tanks then focused on the flame towers, before moving into the base itself. The Allied tanks began fighting their way to the northwest, while one of the demolition trucks rode up from behind, heading straight for the Soviet war factory. The truck succeeded in detonating beside the factory, destroying the building, with a couple of medium tanks also being eliminated in the explosion. The Soviets then did something completely unexpected. They tore down all their structures and rushed at the remaining Allied tanks. The commander ordered his surviving units to retreat back to base. He used the second demolition truck to cover the armored company's retreat, the explosion killing many Soviet troops and a few vehicles. However, there were still many left, and they pursued the retreating Allied units all the way back to their base while under fire from the destroyers. The Allied tanks led the Soviet forces through a narrow route up a hill, where they would run into the awaiting defenses and additional vehicles being actively deployed from the commander's war factory. A massive battle ensued, with Soviet infantry throwing themselves at the Allied defenses, many being gunned down by a pillbox, blown up by mobile artillery, or run over by the medium tanks. The enemy ore trucks tried to distract some of the defenders, but to no avail. The commander ordered his armored units to prioritize eliminating the enemy V-2 launchers and heavy tanks. The majority of the Soviet forces were wiped out, with but a few remaining troops arriving late to the battle. Once the last of these units had been eliminated, the region was secure, and the commander's mission was finally accomplished. Sometime afterward, the commander was ordered to report back to Allied High Command, where he ran into General Carville.
Commander, I didn't expect you for a couple of days. I was just talking about you to the Whigs upstairs. I guess saving London from getting nuked was kind of an attention grabber. The Prime Minister just sent over a big basket of, crumpets, kind of a consolation prize. You know, we get Poland, they get crumpets. Well, I know you have other missions that you've got to take care of. Don't let me slow you down. Keep up the good work, son.
From here, there are no more reports regarding further missions conducted by the unnamed commander. Though the Allies had liberated Poland, the task of finishing off the Soviet Union by pushing into the Russian motherland was well underway. It makes sense that the unnamed commander would have been active in these efforts, despite there being no information in our records. It's possible that he may have been among the generals briefed by Stavros and von Essling before the final battle to capture Moscow, a victory which brought an end to the war in the Allies' favor. There was an incident that occurred sometime after the Soviet surrender, involving nuclear waste and giant ants of all things. I've already taken the liberty of filing a report on this incident, which occurred during a time of transformation for the Allies, going from a military junta designed to oppose Soviet aggression to a more organized defense pact aimed at increasing global security. This transformation would take many years to become fully realized, but was completed just as a new conflict was emerging. One not fought over ideology, but for control over the most valuable resource that arrived on Earth from the dark void of the cosmos. That, of course, is perhaps a report for another day, should High Command put me in charge of such an assignment. I hope this series has got you up to speed on the history of the Second World War, or at least, what history has survived the past decades of conflict over that accursed green crystal. Consequently, it doesn't surprise me that many today view the Second World War as myth or legend, despite it being the historical prelude of our organization. With that said, it's time to bring this report to a close, so until we meet again, Good luck, Commander.
Commander, or I should say General, are you still on duty? Go home. Have a beer. You're a hero. Hell, we're all heroes.